This is House Planning Help, episode 123. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. My personal goal is still to create an energy-efficient home. Time is ticking though. I wanted to do it before I was 40, which is this coming August. In this session, my guest is Michelle Nelson from the Build Your House Yourself University podcast. She's in a very similar position to me. She wants to build a house. She's learning about it. She's podcasting about what she's learnt. And today we're comparing notes. So we're looking at US versus UK and just having a bit of a chit-chat two-way going on here. Before we get into that, I always like to do this until I move on a stage, just let you know where I am with land and opportunities that I'm seeking. There was one that I talked about on a recent podcast where I'd found something that I really liked, where the price was so good and everything was just good, except for a one big but, which was planning permission. It didn't have any planning permission that you need here in the UK. And despite the fact that it was in the middle of a village, it was on the greenbelt. So I sought advice. We could try and fight this, see if we could get it reversed. And it was risky. Not sure I want to take a risk like that on my first project, although the upside could be very, very big. And of course, what happens when you don't go through with this? You want to know what did happen. There were two developers that put in offers, both above the asking price, which is interesting because if you can't build on this land, it is totally useless unless they plan to sit on it and just know that one day rules will change or something will happen. So I'm going to be very, 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 very upset if I see a house built there in the coming weeks, months, years. However, on the plus side, although this is a tougher situation, we've seen two more bungalows that we think we could knock down and potentially put up new houses. The trouble is, there's always a but, isn't there? The trouble is, it's a little bit on the edge of the budget, one of them, and then the other one is definitely over budget. However, it's keeping me thinking. Maybe over budget. I can still afford it, I know. I just don't want to go there. I wanted to keep this build relatively sensibly priced. It just doesn't seem to be happening like that. I don't know what you're supposed to do. Do I just go on waiting forever? I really want to get onto the next stage if at all possible. Obviously, I don't want to make any silly mistakes. So that's where I'm at the moment. If anything changes, of course, you'll be the first to know. Let's get to our featured interview. Very happy to bring this to you. Michelle Nelson from the Build Your House Yourself University podcast. On a similar path to me, she's wanting to build her own home. She's doing her research in public. And I thought this would be a perfect time to sit down and compare notes and also compare USA versus UK. What's going well? What's not going well? And will we learn something about each other or just discover we've got exactly the same issues? Maybe a bit of different terminology, but that's about it. So we get going on this. I asked Michelle why she wanted to build her own house.
Well, you know, Ben, it's sort of been my dream since I was a little girl. I grew up mostly in apartments and in small townhouses and always just dreamed of building my own house on a lot with a great view. And it's just always been a dream of mine since I was a little girl.
You're obviously underway in finding out different bits of information about it. So how practical has it been? Is this a realistic dream or is this going to be hard work throughout?
It's going to be hard work throughout. But here's the thing. I think that if we prepare in advance, if we get a great plan, and if we do our due diligence before we start construction, I think it can be a much less stressful and more enjoyable process. The thing is to plan, to do the research up front, and to have a great plan in place before construction starts.
You mentioned about wanting a view from your new house. Were there any other things that you had, not necessarily set in stone, but ideas before you did any research? You've had this dream for ages. What were they?
Well, you know, I used to think that I wanted to live in the countryside until I lived in the country for a few months where I could not get to stores, restaurants, or work in a timely manner. And I think that's an ideal dream, but it wasn't practical for me. And so I'm glad I found that out in my 20s so that I didn't buy a lot in the countryside. But I thought that that would be a great thing, but I was wrong. So after that experience, I realized that I kind of want to be in the midst of church, stores, my work, my friends. I grew up in the suburbs, and it's something that I'm comfortable with. I like the suburbs. I've never lived in the city. I like visiting a city, but I'm not so sure it's the place for me to live. So I wanted to be in the suburbs near stores and friends and work. And of course, the view was really important. And I just wanted to be in a safe, sort of friendly atmosphere.
Now, as a Brit, we always have this idea of American towns, cities sprawling. So where would you put yourself in the middle of this sprawl? You're obviously not in the city.
I am not. I am in the suburbs, and I am in the South in the United States. So I think we are not quite sprawling. Maybe that is a bit of an overstatement, but there's plenty of land here, and the city is drivable. It's not a walkable city. And in fact, most cities in the United States are not walkable. There are a few that you might know. There's New York City, which is quite walkable. Washington, D.C. is pretty walkable, but most of the United States, as you said on the podcast, on my podcast, most of the United States is built to drive from place to place. So it is a bit spread out.
Does anyone ever think about that and almost get a little bit concerned, say, if situations changed and we weren't able to get hold of, we call it petrol, your fuel for your cars? What do you call it? I've forgotten.
Yeah, fuel, gasoline.
Gasoline, that's it, yeah. But does that ever concern anyone, or really just not on the radar?
Well, I know this is going to sadden you, Ben, but it's probably not on the radar for most Americans. It's because that we, even in our gas, even in areas, in times when we had gas shortages, we've always been able to get it. And I think that most people think that it's always going to be that way.
Getting back to what you're trying to do, you're also making a podcast about what you're learning and as you go. Where did you start with that?
Well, I started the podcast at the beginning of this year in January 2016, and I am basically learning and teaching the basics of residential construction. And as I learn, I teach my audience. You know, I kind of think of it as, I don't know what you call it in the UK, but in the US, when we go to college or university, we have study groups. And so students in the class will get together after class, and they will simplify complex concepts, and they will break down the very complicated concepts that they learn in the class. And so I am thinking of my podcast as sort of a big study group where I am the leader of the study group, but I am a peer. I am a fellow student. And so I started out just teaching the very basics of residential construction and home design. And I continue to do that.
I think that's one of the great ways of learning, though, as well. I'm sure they say after you've learned something, the best way for it to stay in your brain is to try and tell someone else.
Yes, absolutely. We used to say, see one, teach one, do one.
Where did you start? Was it just going to be random for you, or did you think, no, I've got to start in this specific area?
No, I didn't. And I even struggle with that today, thinking, should I go in a specific sequence? To be honest, it's just whatever I am interested in learning about at the time is what I teach and I research. Yeah.
That's me as well. That's the way I've gone. I sometimes look back and think, oh dear, that was a wobbly path, but I think you've got to try, haven't you? Okay, I want to do something slightly different in this podcast because we're both doing the same thing on different sides of the Atlantic. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity just to compare notes and to see what things we've discovered. So let's just start with any observations or things that you felt you've learned that's just, oh, wow, I'm so pleased I dug into this.
I am very pleased that I dug into home energy rating systems. And I'm not sure that you have that in the UK, but it is, it's called HERS. Again, it's Home Energy Rating System. And it is a process that we have here in the United States, where we rate homes based on their energy efficiency. They are independent companies. I think it started with the U.S. government sort of heading the whole thing, but independent companies will come in and they will test your home while it's under construction for energy efficiency. And I am so pleased that I learned about that. There are different levels of energy efficiency that can be your target. And depending on, I guess, your budget and your interest in having a really efficient home, that will determine what type of insulation, what type of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems you put in, even what types of windows and doors that you install. So I am really happy that I learned about that, because that's something I definitely will put into my new home. I will have my new home energy rated for sure.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you on that from my perspective, probably learning about the fabric of the building and how you can construct something that will just use very little energy. That has got to be right up there. And you know that I'm a fan of the Passive House Standard, and it's what I'm trying to build myself. We all get there in a minute in this conversation, no doubt, talking about land. So I think that is brilliant. The other thing this is almost a surprise one, but the more I think about this and the amount of homes that are being built, slight aside here, but I keep coming back to population, that I think that this is going to be such a critical issue when we think about housing in the future. Because we could go on building, but when do we say stop? I know you've got more land than we do over in the States, but I think it's not just land we're talking about here. Every house that goes up uses resources. So I think that it has to come into the public, the world consciousness. We're much more, we're having this chat, different sides of the world, we're sharing information. This happens every day. People are just living like this. So sooner or later, we've got to realize, actually, we get too many people, we're not going to be able to live the lifestyles that we want to live. And we're hoping that the whole developing world catch up. Well, I mean, that just physically cannot happen. So yeah, there's my slight aside. Yeah, I like going into these bigger debates. What else have you got for me in terms of things that you feel that you've learned?
Well, I've learned how to make a house strong and not just pretty. When I went to the International Builders Show, which was here in Las Vegas in January 2016, I came across a company called Simpson Strong Tie, and I actually had been introduced to them by a structural engineer who had told me how wonderful that product was, and the products that they offer are. They have a system called a continuous load path. And what happens is that there are ties and there are fasteners and metal bolts that literally connect the roof to the wall studs, and the wall studs to the flooring, and the flooring to the foundation. And so it's one continuous load path, so that if there are any torsional or wind forces that may want to sort of shake the house, or in our part of the United States, we have storms, tornadoes and hurricanes. So when those high winds come, that continuous load path will strengthen the house, and it will keep the house tied together so that it is less likely to be damaged by those high winds. So I want a pretty house, Ben, but I am a big fan of having a strong house that is lasting as well.
I think another really interesting difference between the US and the UK in terms of timescales, obviously, and we've talked about a lot of America grew up around the car, so that shows what we're talking about 100 years or so. In the UK, we've got a lot of historic buildings that have stood the test of time. And I always think the aspect that's interesting is some of the materials that they've used are just the wood, they're mud in a lot of cases, very old buildings. So it just goes to show that I think each different part of the world will have some sort of construction method or way to survive the climate that it's got to face.
Yes. Unfortunately, here in the United States, I think for too long in the past, several decades or so, I think that budget, unfortunately, was the main concern of many builders. And so they maybe weren't building as strong of a house as they could have in order to save a bit of money.
I could counter that by saying, were they building big houses? Could they not have just scaled it down a bit?
That is such a great point, and you're exactly right.
I was also going to ask about construction type, because here in the UK, we have a predominant construction type of brick and block. Is that the same in the States?
Yeah, we do the same thing. A lot of the foundation work, for example, is with concrete blocks or concrete forms. And then, yes, we use quite a bit of brick. And it depends on the area or the region of the United States. In some areas like the Southwest, stucco is quite popular. And then we have siding that is often used. But the foundations are almost always concrete forms or concrete blocks.
Now, let's move this on a bit. I've got you to secretly write down 3 things that you think are great about the US house building industry, and I've got 3 from the UK. So I'm going to kick this off. And my first point that I've put down here is that I think we actually have a real diversity of projects, particularly when it comes to people who are going out there and building their own. It's not necessarily with their own hands, but they are going out there and driving the project through. So that's going to be my first one.
My first one is, and you've already sort of alluded to this, is that we have plenty of land in the United States. Maybe not in more large, crowded cities, but in general in the United States, we do have plenty of land to choose from.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah.
All right, then I've got another one here. And I think that actually the UK, we're quite good. We have certain people who are good at solving issues, innovators, and that if we could lean on these people more or listen to what they were saying, my goodness, we would go a long way. So that's mine. A number of people doing great stuff. We just need to get the word out.
And my second one is that our supplies and materials are plentiful here. I know that that's not true in some parts of the world, but they are plentiful here. And we also have a diversity of suppliers because we are the United States. And so a lot of companies are communicating with us and trying to get their products known, and they advertise here. So we do have quite a few supplies and quite a diverse variety of supplies.
If you wanted to go and build a house with materials that you could get locally, that haven't traveled big distances, are you saying that that is a possibility? You could source that out quite easily?
Yes, you could. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Very nice. All right. My third point will be that self-builders here in the UK are very open to sharing. And I think that is golden, that they will open up their houses often, say, come and have a look round. They'll explain what went wrong. And I think that openness and honesty is such a valuable commodity.
Well, I could say something similar about the United States, and it is about the residents of the United States. They are quite open, especially when someone has had a custom house built. They're quite proud of it and they want to show it off. And so they're very open about sharing their ideas, either in person or over the internet. We have a great site here called, I think it's called gardenweb.com. It's a part of house.com, which you may have heard of. And it's a great forum, and people share their information openly. They're very open about their experiences and quite honest.
All right, let's move on to challenges now. And I'll start off with this, that I think one of the sad parts of development in the UK is that 99%, 0.999 probably, of house building in the UK is just all driven by money and people trying to make money. And that leads to just poor choices, because really they just want these properties off their hands and then they can make some more that they can then sell.
Yes, well, Ben, unfortunately, that is not unique to the UK. It's as I just said, it's a part of, I think, the construction industry. Unfortunately,
this is one of the things about having a chat like this that we get to size up. Where are our differences and where are our similarities? And sometimes it's just in the terminology, isn't it? That
yes,
no doubt, if you've listened to the podcast, you've thought, what's he talking about there? But so that's my first one for challenges or problems to overcome.
My first one is that we do not have a very popular self-build movement here. And in fact, builders, general contractors are not, although homeowners are very open in sharing, builders and general contractors are not very open at all in sharing their knowledge. And it is like pulling teeth to try to get information from them. When I started my podcast, I thought I'll interview lots of builders and they'll tell us their secrets and their tricks. And I have not had one to agree to speak to me. Not one.
That is strange.
Not
now, why?
one.
Why do you think that is? Because certainly I've found doing this podcast wonderful that you can just reach out to people and on the whole they've just said yes immediately. But that's all countries. That's not just saying here in the UK, although a lot of the podcasts are from the UK. Yeah,
I have not had a problem with any other type of guest except for builders. And I think I can only make an assumption because I haven't really been able to have a conversation with one, but I can only think maybe they think their position is threatened if people want to self-build, if owner builders want to take on the task of being, their own general contractor, maybe they're a bit threatened by that. But what they must realize is that self-build and, being an owner builder, that is for some people like me who want a little bit more control and who want to be actively involved. But then there are others who have no desire to do that. And they will definitely want to hire a builder or general contractor to head their project. So I think that builders are a bit threatened, but I don't think that they should be.
And builders as well. I think that if you're a good builder, you're just going to be in demand. You have nothing to worry about. And Michelle, you know what's going to happen? The second that we finish this podcast and publish it, you're going to be inundated by builders wanting to be on your show. That's what's going to happen.
We'll see.
Now, I've lost track here. What number are we on? Am I on number 2 or have you... Yeah.
No, you're on number 2.
I'm on number 2. Okay, so
yes.
I'm going to say, and I bet this might be on your list as well, that house building is not an easy process in terms of if you're trying to learn this for the first time, it's probably the biggest thing you would ever do in your life. And there's just, in the UK, certainly no clear path to walk down.
I agree with you. It's the same in the United States. My number 2 is that subcontractors, and I guess the verbiage is the same over there. Those are the plumbers, the electricians, etc. The subcontractors are less likely to prioritize owner builders as opposed to general contractors. So they can sometimes put your project, if you are an owner builder, put your contract on the back burner while they service the builders. And so sometimes it can be difficult to schedule them.
I think this is the same in the UK too. You get put in a holding pattern, don't you? We'll come to you when we've got time. I don't know whether it's to do with owner builders just doing it once and they know
yes,
you're very unlikely. If you build a house that you like, you're going to be staying in it.
That's what I think.
Number 3 on my list, building your own home really, I think in the UK, when I was sitting down and writing my list, is for the wealthy. And I know that that's not exactly true. And I certainly think it shouldn't be true. Just most places that you will go, I think you're stretched to the absolute limits of what you want to do. And people may pick me up on that and say, that's wrong. I don't know. I just feel that at the moment it's aimed at the wealthy. If you've got lots of money to throw at things, you'll get through okay.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I don't know what the income needs to be, but you definitely have to have some extra income in order to take on such a project. My number 3 is similar. It's funny. I have this written down. Financing can be difficult, but especially for those who want to self-build. Owner builders can sometimes have some difficulty getting financing through the bank. But here's the good news. The good news is that even if you want to act as your general contractor, a lot of times banks will allow that if you have someone with building experience on the project, not necessarily acting as the general contractor or builder, but maybe a site or project manager. So if you indeed want to be a general contractor for your own home, you can do that and then hire someone with building experience to supervise the project, and the banks will usually go for that option.
In terms of your project, how much are you going to be leaning on the banks?
Probably not much.
Good.
Which is why I'm taking my time and saving hopefully quite a bit of money so that I don't have to lean on them very much at all.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay in that boat as well. All right, well, I like that. That was good. One final thing that I thought would be good is for us both to have an area that we'd like to find out about how you do it over there. And the funny thing is, I think we've both got the same thing written down. I want to find out about zoning, which I think is the equivalent of planning permission. So that's my question to you, first of all, is what is zoning? How does it work in the States?
Well, in the United States, we have a building permits or zoning department. The name may vary from region to region, but that is where you get your initial building permit. They approve your house plans. They look at your lot survey and make sure that the positioning of the house is appropriate, and they approve your project. And so that happens at the very beginning before you can start construction. And then there are several inspections that have to go on during the construction process. And then at the end, they will give you final approval and you will obtain a certificate of occupancy, which means that you can move into your home. Now,
I think planning permission, it's similar, but it almost, some of that sounded a bit like building regulations, as we call it over in the UK. And I'm wondering, your system, is it actually quite simple that you say, these are our plans, this is what I want to do, and then they basically go, yes, or do this, do that, yes?
Yes, and they may vary it a bit. And so maybe what is more similar to your planning permission is sometimes neighborhoods, actually oftentimes neighborhoods, especially in suburbs, will have what we call a homeowners association. And that is sort of the governing body of the neighborhood. And that governing body will look at your house plans and say, yes, this is an appropriate size. Yes, these are appropriate materials for you to build your house with. So we do have that entity, but that will vary from neighborhood to neighborhood.
That's the other thing that we've got to bear in mind. I know the UK is split up into, well, it's not even logical sometimes. Sometimes in Scotland or in Wales, they'll be doing things just a little bit different. On the whole, it's the same system. I can't keep track fully of what these things are. So, yeah, there are a lot of local variations. All right, good. Now, is there anything else that you would like to know about or comments about the podcast as you've been listening to it?
Well, I love the podcast. Yours is one of the first home building podcasts that I found, and I just really love it. I've learned so much from you, and I love your approach. I guess it's similar to mine. We are learning along with our audiences, and so I think you take complex ideas and you simplify them so that we can learn them, and I am such a fan, Ben, and I appreciate you very much.
Oh, thank you, Michelle.
No, really.
And I think that this is interesting, that what you're doing, what I'm doing, maybe why did you want to do it this way, you know, and what would you advise to someone else? Because we often see it, don't we? And maybe your strength, if you're someone who wants to build a house, you know, you could blog about it, you could make videos about it. There are multiple ways of thinking about this, but yeah, how did that work for you and how are you enjoying it?
Well, I am a huge fan of podcasts, and I love them because you can, and I am also a lifetime learner. I like to learn about lots of things. And I like a podcast because you can learn while you exercise or while you do your house chores, or, you know, you can multitask with podcasts. And I thought that that is the medium that I wanted to present the information to my audience with. I wanted them to be able to listen to me, but also, I mean, we're busy people. And so to be able to listen and learn and do other tasks was just, I thought that was just a great idea.
Well, Michelle, I really enjoyed this chat. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/123. You can review the key points, and of course, we will link you across to the Build Your House Yourself University website and podcast. And I'm so pleased that Michelle is there, particularly when we had a difficult decision to actually niche down a bit with this podcast and to get more detail from the UK. Sometimes it's the really boring stuff as well. I don't necessarily want to do it, and I know that this is only for a time. I feel it's important though for moving my own build forwards and to getting into some of that nitty gritty stuff. So Michelle's website address, we'll link that in. If you've got a comment or a question about today's episode, you can head to the bottom of the show notes and leave it there. houseplanninghelp.com/123 one more time. Let's finish on a hub update. So the hub is the premium part of the website. It's a community. It's also a learning zone. And in the learning zone, we've added a new module this month called Getting Started. And the idea being that we wanted to lay out the best knowledge of that logical sequence. If you're just getting going, this will be perfect for you, because we've actually put in some things that I wish were there when I first started, including a reality check, some bits that you may not like, but I think will be really useful. So that in our module this month. At Long Barrow, the passive house case study that we're covering, they're putting up the steel frame, and we find out why is there a steel frame in the first place? What does it do? There's also a bit of thermal bridging we've got to be careful of, because they want to have a balcony and a brise soleil as well. And they put up this steel frame in 5 hours. I think it's been a cracking day's work. So you can watch the video on Long Barrow in the hub too. If you don't know what the hub's about, or you don't know where to get started, this is something you should write down. houseplanninghelp.com/hub. And some topics that we're going to cover later. We've got one that we want to do on sweat equity. And actually, if you can ever help to contribute to some of these things, this is one that's quite difficult to pin down, people who have managed to put in work themselves and made it pay off, or maybe you put in the work and actually you wish you'd never done it. I'd love to hear from you on this point. Other topics we'll be covering: finishing off a home, including gardens, borders, driveways. We'll be doing one on roofing options. We're trying to be a little bit more strategic and planned going forwards in the hub. That's me done. Thank you so much for being there. Always appreciate your company. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.